Hello, hello. All right. It's good to have both of you guys here. All right, so let's just have a conversation, right? Because you guys are both doing DA and a bunch of other things, slightly different approaches. Let's just jump right in. First, Altan, how do you approach your DA and stuff like that? And then we'll go to you and how you do it. Kind of brief, and then we can kind of discuss.
Yeah, so when we started doing DA, we were a team at Near, so folks are here. And the first approach we took is there's a lot of block space around. And Near is perfectly suitable for this, is with sharding. And DA is a thing that pretty much Near sold for in 2020. So we went back and said, hey, let's just build something on Near. And that's how we started for building DA. It's scalable, it's cheap, and everything you need. So I know Anurag has a different stance here, but we believe in a world where you can just use blocks from everywhere. So that's kind of, and there's enough L1s to do that. That was the approach we did.
Awesome. So you use the current L1. All right. Let's hear your approach.
Yeah. So I'm coming from a different perspective, right? So I started off in crypto, starting Polygon, started with building a Plasma, one of the first off-chain scaling solutions for Ethereum. Then we went on to do this roll-up thing with ZK EVM and stuff like that. And around 2020, we realized that this roll-up centric roadmap was going to become pretty huge. And so where we came from that was if we were going to this more roll-up centric multi-chain sort of a future, of course Ethereum was on that execution sharding roadmap which Near eventually implemented. But we were coming more from the Ethereum side, which is saying, okay, this is a roll-up centric roadmap. And if you're going to look at the roll-up centric roadmap, you will see that the fundamental requirements are, of course, you need lots of data availability, and also things like interoperability between these two, between rollups in general. And we thought that let's start with the hardest problem first. Let's tackle something called data availability sampling, which Ethereum has on its dank sharding roadmap, what is called dank sharding in general. And we started with that, and then now we are making way forward. After building scalable DA, we are moving on to things like interop, and shared security and so on.
Okay, so you're doing and you built your own L1, right?
Yeah.
So let's go a little deeper into that. So why did you do that approach? Is it to help follow up with the ZK and all that? So if you could just kind
of. So if you kind of look at data availability and sampling the implementation itself, right? It of course requires this. The base layer requires this whole crypto economic security guarantee. It cannot be defined by cryptographic proofs in general. So you really need some sort of crypto economic game there. And we thought if we had our own L1, it's just better to do all sorts of combinations in that sense.
Can I ask a question? So do you still think DA is an important problem to solve? I know we've a bunch of problems. We have a lot of L1s that popped up. I know there's a bunch of folks that raise more money doing DA. What's your take on that one?
I think DA is just the starting point, right? It cannot be just the only feature of the solution. So if you kind of look at what our roadmap that is just the first step, right? What do you really, if you look at the landscape of rollups today, right? It's just too fragmented. For example, each major rollup stack is doing its own interop thing. Optimism doing his super chain thing, ZK Sync is doing elastic chain and so on, right? So everyone runs sequencers, for example, centralized sequencers. There are different protocols for decentralizing the sequencer, different protocols for interoperating between these ecosystems. So it's, of course, we are of course in the middle of this whole modular sort of revolution. But the reality is that when you kind of look at the other extreme end of the spectrum, which is the more monolithic integrated sort of spectrum, everything looks neat and tidy, everything working together. This side looks very messy at the moment, right? It's kind of hard to kind of ensure that we have these more heterogeneous rollups all work together. And so you really need to be thinking end-to-end vertical stack, not only just one layer.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, so here's my question for you. So we got a little technical there, which is good. I want to see if people listening, how do we go to I'm at a place, how do I explain DA to a non? Because I do know maybe the people that you're focused on are going to be more tech heavy, but how do you just describe DA and kind of like explain like I'm 5? We'll bring it down a little bit and then we'll go back tech again.
I think, yeah, I mean, see, data availability is of course a very technical concept in general. Most users won't even need to understand that much. It's mostly the roll-up devs who want to understand it. But one of the side effects or main benefits is that if you want to, especially with data availability sampling, if you want to verify the chain yourself without running this full node, for example, that's pretty much the easiest way. And if you combine it with things like execution proofs, like ZK execution proofs also, then the chain becomes user verifiable, for example.
When you think about it, it's like blockchains are about promises that you keep. So validators keep promises, right? They basically say, this is going to be the ordering of transactions that I will be committing to execute. DA is sort of similar. So you make a promise that this is going to be the transaction ordering of an L2. L1s do the same thing. Right? So you come in, you want to get that promise and make sure that that promise is correct. So I think that's very important for blockchains and the space as a whole, like promises to be kept. And I guess that's where cryptoeconomic security comes in. That's why ZK comes in. Yeah, so we're quite excited about that, like the promise, keeping promise, and we can talk more about that too.
Definitely, and now I've got my sourced from smart devs questions, right? Because I was like, yo, I got to reach out to the community, let's talk to devs. I'm talking to highly technical stuff. So let's go with cross-chain data verification, great segue. What approaches are being developed to handle cross-chain data availability verification in bridge protocols, and how do these improve interoperability?
Start with ZK, I guess.
Yep, let's ZK.
No, so see, essentially, if you kind of look at this whole roll-up-centric roadmap or the way that we've kind of been looking at it, right? Like you can say data availability is a scaling problem. I would say it's also a interoperability problem, right? Like it's really like, if you, like either you build one big fat chain that can house all the world's transactions, or you want to get into these multi-chain, multi-roll-up sort of a future. And how do you make this all work together if you are in this multi-chain thing, right? Like, and so, also kind of, when we say that users can verify this, it's not only for users, right? Like other chains need to verify other chains. Like how does that happen? Like in general, before rollups, it was all light, everyone had to build a light client to each other, for example, like in the Cosmos world, for example. And so here, essentially, if you want to move out of the notion that all the world's transactions will not be on one big super blockchain, for example, right? Like it'll be very similar to the where apps on the internet don't really live on one big supercomputer. They live on different servers, scaled independently. And so all of this, if needs to work together, interoperability is a key goal, right? Like how does one rollup trust the other? How does one chain trust the other to do transactions? If you have 100 million transactions, how can you shard them between these chains? So one implementation is of course execution sharding, but what we believe in is the more scalable roll-up centric path.
So we have a, I guess, different approach.
Yeah.
So we love ZK. It's definitely going to be the thing that in the future. But to be more sort of practical, we use cryptoeconomic security. And I know Avail is working on the same thing as well. There's a lot of tokens lying around. So there's Near, there's Cardano, there's all these tokens. There's even Arbitrum. The L2s have like $1 billion of tokens. So how do you take them and use them to make promises? So you basically take those tokens and use them to do cross-chain verification. Instead of doing ZK, how do you attest to them with the tokens, with the security that you get? We work with Avail on this one too, where obviously ZK is great, ZK VMs are coming up, but how do you do this with optimistic rollups? It's a good way to use cryptoeconomic security to attest to different blockchains and say, hey, this is going to be the state. So yeah, the two solutions can be combined to build something better, and I guess that's something that we talk with Avail quite a lot.
Yeah, so I've been thinking on this problem a lot, right? Like, I mean, essentially, what I'm thinking right now is that both these approaches are very important, like the cryptoeconomic security and the cryptographic part, because in general, not all chains will be, like ZK verified immediately. So there will be a lot of optimistic chains, and there's also this distinction between chains with very high liquidity and chains which are new, maybe with low liquidity. And so how I think of this is like there will always be chains that are like big, like high liquidity chains. And then there'll always be a long tail, maybe non-financial use cases or things like that. And really, if you kind of look at the crypto economic security thing, you also have to pay rent. So it makes sense, and even from a liquidity provider perspective, I think what is eventually going to happen is that from a liquidity provider perspective, these migrate to high liquidity chains. But for the long tail, you will need a ZK sort of component because liquidity providers or paying crypto economic security is expensive for this long tail.
Okay, cool. So let's like talk a little bit because you. So like, how does like data storage cost impact the overall tokenomics of a blockchain, right? And I don't know if it probably wouldn't be for you because so it probably wouldn't be for you, but for you. And then, and what mechanisms can help maintain sustainable like fee structures and stuff like that? Can you dive into that just briefly?
Yeah. So see, data availability is not really, like to be very frank, it's not data storage really. Of course, there are data storage. Implications on what you can store, but really the guarantee of data availability is these are all commitments, right? Like I mean, when users send transactions to rollups or rollups send transactions to the DA layer, you're making like a timestamp commitment that I send this ordered transaction data to you, and here's this commitment that this like won't be rolled back, sort of. Like that's really the guarantee. And we keep the data around for a while. Right now the network is new, so we don't need to keep that, purge that data or prune the data. But in general, of course, there will come a time when we will prune the data, but there will always be archival data methods to kind of do it. It's not the same problem. Like how we structure it is, our chain doesn't, at the moment, combine execution and data availability. And so it doesn't lead to things like state bloat, which is a data storage sort of a problem with traditional blockchains.
And maybe you can answer this. I know Avail from the architecture. How does, I guess, if you have only DA, how do you think about like the Avail usage in the ecosystem?
So at the moment, of course, like it looks like a DA only layer, but there are components that we are been working on. There's something called Nexus, which we've been working on, which is, you can think of this as a more of like a proof verification execution environment. So it doesn't do general smart contracts, but can verify proofs from, like ZK rollups. We just tied up with Symbiotic to, kind of bootstrap something that we can use for crypto economic security, for example. So things like that, right? Like, so at the moment, looks like we only provide data availability, but the intention was never to do just that. It's much more.
I joked about it last time when we talked. It's like everything we built has been going in the same direction. So like the last time, like Symbiotic, we work with Eigenlayer. So it has been going on the same direction, which is kind of funny. But then we were very friendly. So that's the, I play in the Unification Cup that we're sponsoring football. So that's quite funny to see like how this evolves over time.
So in both your guys' this is individual, where's one area you think people should be paying more attention to specifically that they aren't, that you're like, that's the spot that like a lot more attention should be, but people aren't looking there because they're looking here?
Yeah, I can respond to this one. So I think Eigenlayer space, AVSs are very interesting because we've been building blockchains for, I don't know, like last 7-8 years, and it's all about keeping promises. So it has state bloat, it has all these problems that you keep on the blockchain. So we believe in a future at Nuffle to use these tokens from anywhere to be able to build the economy of promises. So what do you do in the world of promises? You run oracles, so you provide data to the blockchain. That's number one. You do zk-TLS, which is a technology that allows you to take any data from outside, provide it to a blockchain. So almost like empower these apps outside of the blockchain to make them more usable, because apps are the thing of the future. So that's how we think about it. And what we call this is a Nuff protocol. So it is contracts everywhere, like Near, Arbitrum, anywhere. You can stake your tokens. We use those crypto economic security, plus could be ETH too, honestly. And then we can use that, the promise provided by these assets to do applications outside the blockchain, off-chain. So we're quite excited about that. That's kind of and it uses DA and fast finality at the back end, right? So.
Dude, that's cool. I feel like you just dropped some like alpha there. that was really cool, man. What do you think? Where are you kind of looking? And then I also want to follow up a little bit on your project specifically.
Yeah. So I think when we began Avail back in 2020, that was the time the roll-up centric roadmap for Ethereum was just shaping up in general, and we spent the last 3-4 years building out this hard component called data sampling, which we finally launched in July this year. But over the course of building this, we also saw a lot of stuff that was happening in the modular space in general, right? Like we see a lot of fragmentation, as I already mentioned, right? Like I mean, different people running, let's say, RAS infra, sequencers, like prover networks, interop providers, for example. So all of this is a lot. So like I kind of think of this as these two extremes of this monolithic integrated side of the spectrum and the modular side of the spectrum. And I think modular has become a little bit too unopinionated as well. And so I think the answer is really in the happy medium, somewhere in the middle path, like where we kind of integrate a little bit more so that users don't really need to kind of think about, like especially roll-up devs don't really need to think about maybe like doing their own sequencing, for example, running their own infra. So we are on our upcoming roadmap, we are thinking much more in that area. And essentially all of this is also kind of in service of, what I've been kind of seeing in the last couple of years is that in general, not only crypto world, the entire world is moving towards a more fast, mobile-first sort of UX. Like if you kind of look at Solana, what's happening there in general, like even if you look at it's dismissive of this as meme coin mania, the infrastructure is like doing all of this. Today it's used for meme coins. Today and tomorrow it can be used for anything really, right? Like I mean, but if you kind of look, there's a very strong emphasis on mobile-first UX. Because the younger audience, 15 to 25 age group, is on mobile, right? Like, I mean, not everyone uses a laptop, desktop, browser extension, that sort of a world. I think the Solana guys have been able to focus their ecosystem on this more younger audience, mobile first with SDKs and stuff like that. And I think the rest of the ecosystem I'm not saying they're not active on the mobile side, but I think we need to do much more focus on getting to fast experiences, mobile-first experiences, and all of this infrastructure building should be in service of that. I just kind of did a tweet yesterday saying, if you look at something like Apple Pay is, like tap to pay, very easy, fast mobile experience. But the reality is that there's a lot of infrastructure powering that, which the user is not seeing. I think we have to slowly move there. And I think the technology is there. I mean, or it will be there in a year, for example. So those are, I think, areas to focus on.
I have a question. So commitments are very technical terms. If we take that as a promise in the world, right? And DAS is a thing that is very interesting from a blockchain perspective. Do you see any applications of DAS outside of just blockchain infra, and you think like could be useful for mobile future or something that could enable us to do more than just blockchains?
So within blockchains, of course, like we are experimenting with this whole put the ZK execution proof on the light client sort of a thing, and like either users can verify on their mobile wallet, for example, and so on, or other blockchains can verify, for example. But outside of blockchains, also see really what we ended up building is also like a time stamping server, really. In general. And so I think we've been talking to a few projects outside of the blockchain who are looking to use it for various other requirements, not necessarily for running a blockchain, for time stamping reasons. Even, one particular messaging protocol wants to use it for different use cases, for example. And so I think there is utility in having this whole scalable, shared chain that people can use as a common time stamping server in that sense, right? Like, so we've been seeing those sort of use cases as well.
Dude, I'm digging the like time stamping concept and all that stuff, and I also think mobile. Oh yeah, totally. Speaking of, but yeah, totally thinking of all that. That's like really cool. And the mobile first thing, I agree. Like that should be like the beginning, and then it can go onto a desktop. It's kind of hard to shift that. So, okay, so. What is I like this one. So what advice would you give a developer navigating like how to start building or start working with what you all are each doing. Like, you're targeting a dev, you're talking to a dev. What would you say? Where to start? Where to go? How to, like, what are some like things advice you'd give them?
Well, yeah, first one, definitely don't build a new blockchain. So that's one.
Build a new.
Because there's been a lot of different blockchains that have like almost became zombies, right? Like that, even though there's incentives for that. Number two is, well, take some of the things that in the world that we make promises and try to build some tech around it. Like I gave an example of zk-TLS. I think one of the teams from the EigenLayer ecosystem is building it to verify Uber ratings on chain so that you can build really cool applications around that. And that's what, like, for example, there's a lot of use cases in the real world, like Sweatcoin on Near. Things like it could be used to do pretty much verifiable data that allows you to do really cool stuff. So look around there. I think apps have been undervalued in a sense because the incentives weren't there. I think after Polymarket and Pump.Fun, I think people are going to get more excited about apps as a chain and also the technologies here. So like Avail Nexus, for example, with near fast finality layer, which is the NFFL that we built, you can actually do it any rollup, right? You can connect any rollup. So infrastructure is coming. I think need to think about like how do we use these promises that we make in the blockchains usable.
Yeah, I think, see, in general, the industry in general has, I would say, of course, including us, we've kind of sort of failed to educate the people outside of our very cute crypto circles that, like what blockchain really is, right? Like, so we have like this one team building our ecosystem, which is doing this whole gaming play, right? Like it basically takes in data from some of the most popular games and then builds tournaments for the long tail, really. Like if you kind of see, like gaming tournaments are for the top 1%. This is like gaming tournaments for the long tail. And it takes in data from these big publishers like, Valve and those sort of people. And actually, something like zk-TLS, for example, is really cool for them because they're able to take that data and put it into use trustlessly. And when they started, they wanted to kind of do escrows for, let's say, community, like for the tournament, like pool, for example. Doing that in traditional fintech is really, really hard. Doing an escrow in traditional fintech is really hard. Like, and they, like cancel their plans to do that because escrows are actually standard in smart contracts, for example, right? Like, and it's much easier for them to scale to a global audience by using smart contract infra for this. So I think what I'm trying to say is, like, from an app builder perspective, like, I think most builders should be looking at what problems are there out in the world that they're trying to solve and how blockchains can help them, right? Like, I mean, things like escrows, pretty cool. Things like tapping into a global audience, pretty cool, for example. Even there's a lot of things, right? Like asset collateralization, right? Like if you kind of see something like a Avail, it looks like we are, kind of doing this digital native crypto tokens here, like we are swapping them, putting into vaults, for example. But just for a moment, think these are stocks or, like let's say gold, for example, or anything that can be tokenized in the real world. And you suddenly see that if you have like some sort of app that you can, let's say, buy gold or buy some sort of asset which is not available in a liquid market. So today, if like India, for example, gold purchases is very prevalent, right? Like, and you can buy gold on these apps. But the gold really stuck there in the app, right? You can't do anything with the gold. You cannot collateralize it to take a loan against it, for example. And so these are all examples of these siloed systems being built in the real world, and every system like that is purpose built for a particular use case. Blockchains are this very composable structure where, like once you kind of tokenize one asset, they can get access to this whole, like set of building blocks. So I think it's, so one, of course, use case, fit it to the use case, but also we should also be doing a much better job of, explaining what blockchains are really good for.
Gotcha.
I can also say one more, which is Frat, one of our CTO talks about it. Service agreements are very important, right? So you you work with Amazon, you work with Google, you work with all these folks, and they say that they're going to provide a service. But usually when they don't, there's no disincentive for you not to do it. So that's why like crypto could be very useful for. And that's the future of like the future that we envision.
That's awesome. All right, so we're coming to the end here, but here's my question. So does like the development of AI affect anything that you guys do? And if so, how? Like, right, we just had a big presentation today about like AI agents, they're coming, right? And there's gonna be a wave of them. Where does this fit in, or does it not, right? Like that could be a possibility too.
ZK?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, see, of course, AI is a very exciting development in general. I'm still looking at that whole AI agent thing, still trying to figure out what will come out of it. I mean, you can, of course, think about lots of AI agents interacting with each other, doing a lot of microtransactions, micro decision making, those sorts of things. And for sure, like if there is an economy that emerges with that AI agent thing, they need some rails, right? Like, I mean, it's not going to be, like they're not going to KYC, open a bank account and do stuff like that. It's going to be crypto, for sure, right? Like, I mean, in general, it's also like, it's AI is not only AI agents, right? Like, it's also, like pattern matching, for example. And so you have a lot of problems in blockchain that are not certain, all on-chain, right? Like you have things like intent matching, for example, and so on, that can be solved by this. You can have like a lot of wallets getting smarter because most wallets are very dumb today, right? Like how can you make them understand what the user's intent is, for example, right? Like so there's all sorts of things that can apply. So I'm cautiously optimistic for sure.
Yeah, and when you say wallets getting smarter, I really like that because I'm always shouting from the rooftops, like Near's like wallet structure and account structure. I'm just like, that is like so cool. What do you think?
There's a point though. AI is getting smarter, but how do you ensure that AI doesn't rug you, right? And that's very cool with crypto economic security. Is let's just do a swap, but instead of Near, it hallucinated and did a Bitcoin swap, right? Like you should incentivize that behavior. So for that, again, promises are very important. So you need to make AIs that make promises about you using the assets that we've already built, which is at this point, I think it's coming to 3 trillion market, but it was a 2 trillion market almost a month ago. So that's quite exciting for us that we're looking into. And I already posted about this, which is one example is this kind of a AI federated learning AVS. There's a lot of these things that you can build in AI that is using crypto economic security that we have built in this industry to do something that can't rug you.
That's awesome, and it's exciting that like now you're thinking about it. And as we're ending here, I just can't wait to talk to you both again in 6 months from now and see where you're thinking about how AI folds in. Are these agents that as they take off, where you fold in? So thank you so much. And with like we're out of time, but do you have like one last thing you want to say or anything? Or we're feeling pretty good. That was pretty great.
See you in the next panel, because every time, every conference I have something with Anurag. So at this point, it's been a tradition. So I'm excited for that.
Cool. Thank you so much, and let's have a great day, guys. Cool.
Yep. Thank you.